Wayne Goss is being remembered as a leader who modernised Queensland. He led the Labor Party out of the political wilderness and was Premier from 1989 to 1996. Mr Goss died at his home in Brisbane this morning, 17 years after first being diagnosed with a brain tumour. He was 63.
It was an election victory that Labor had waited 32 years for.
This December the 2nd, 1989, is the end of the Bjelke-Petersen era.
The Goss era brought a wave of reforms: environmental protections, fair electoral boundaries and decriminalising homosexuality.
Wayne Goss made a huge difference to Queensland, and I feel today that we've lost a Labor hero and that we've lost him far too young.
Wayne dragged Queensland out of the darkness into the sunlight after 32 years of National Party administration. He was a great moderniser, as well as a great optimist.
The police service was modernised and parliamentary scrutiny increased as he implemented the recommendations of the Fitzgerald inquiry into corruption in Queensland.
He's a very decent person with integrity. He was a Mr Clean of Queensland politics. He came into office at a very difficult time in the post-Fitzgerald period, and he cleaned up Queensland.
Tony Fitzgerald himself has described Mr Goss as a man of uncompromising integrity and an outstanding Queenslander whom I greatly admired. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was his Chief of Staff.
He gave his all, and we are not just the better for it, but frankly, Queensland, its modernity began with Goss, just as Australia's modernity began with Whitlam.
The news came through during this morning's State Cabinet meeting. A minute's silence was observed and the Premier rang Mr Goss's wife to offer his condolences.
The things he did in the 6 years he was in office were quite significant and have far-reaching implications today in terms of a better Queensland.
Anna Bligh last saw him in September.
He was clearly unwell at that time, but as he faced everything, he faced it with courage. He knew that he was unwell, he knew how sick he was, but he still was taking visitors, he was still making political jokes, and as much as he might have struggled to do that at times, he was determined not to go quietly into that night.
He was an inspiration and mentor to the current crop of Labor MPs.
Wayne Goss grew up in Anawa. He went to my local high school in the southwest suburbs of Brisbane. He achieved the highest office in Queensland.
Wayne Goss was a great Australian and he was truly a great Labor man. He was a